What the Tech is brought to you by Hover. Find a domain name for your idea. Go to hover.com/WTT and get 10% off your first purchase. Again, that's hover.com/WTT. Hover, domain names for your ideas. TextExpander helps you communicate smarter. Visit TextExpander.com/podcast for 20% off your first year. Hey everybody, welcome to What the Tech. I'm Angel Zarin. Of course, I'm joined by Mr. Paul Thurrott. How you doing, Paul?
Pretty good.
I said What the
How
Tech,
are you?
right? I said people are watching What the Tech. I'm in a daze right now. My allergies are so bad. It's that time of the year where I'm miserable for about until September. So quite a few months.
Sure.
Paul, you're here. We're on a Tuesday. I'm glad to do the show with you.
Yeah.
I know people are very excited to get your opinions on things because I hear it all week long.
I don't
What
know
day
why,
are you
but
doing
okay.
this? Paul, you're a rock star. Listen, in the Microsoft world, in the tech podcasting world, and tech, you're a rock star. And if people have ever gone out with you, they see what a rock star you are. People
Go out
just
with me?
like if people just went out with you for a little bit, had a couple drinks with you, people come up, they want to talk to you, they want to touch your hair. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. Guys, we do have a lot to talk about today. Paul, how was Easter? Good? You had a good Easter?
Yeah, we don't really celebrate Easter per se. We were in Pittsburgh looking at schools for my daughter. How was he? But you have little kids and stuff.
I
Easter
do.
must be fun in your house.
My daughter said it was the most fun day ever, so I think she did well. She enjoyed it. And the
I was in
gardeners
a
are outside.
McDonald's in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, and they had an Easter tree in the lobby that was like a Christmas tree, but with eggs instead of bulbs, and then like a rabbit on the top of it.
Sounds fun.
Not the
Is
dumbest
that
thing
a
I saw
thing?
in the middle of Pennsylvania, but it's just strange.
It's a lot of strange things happening there, huh?
Yeah.
We do have a lot to talk about. Obviously, last week we spoke about the Samsung Galaxy Fold and the number of issues that reviewers have had. Is this the first time, Paul, that I'm trying to remember another situation where reviewers had the product and because of the issues that they all had, they
Right.
decided to either cancel or delay a product? Has this happened to a mainstream product like
No.
this?
In fact, last week I discussed the issue that reviewers had with Surface Pro 4 and the original Surface Book. Microsoft did not delay the launch of that product, and it went on into great infamy. That generation of products had endemic hardware problems that they never solved. It's actually more likely for the reverse to happen, though, where reviewers sign off on a product, they give it all, 5-star reviews, and then problems start happening. And that happened with the Note 7 a couple years ago. Remember, the reviews of that device were very popular. And I think that highlights the problem with tech reviews. Everyone's rushing to get the review out as quickly as they can rather than doing a thorough job. And I think if people had used them for longer periods of time, the types of problems that occurred later would have occurred to them, and we would have gotten a more of a heads up
So
about what
for
was happening.
for people who don't know, like you receive review units at times, correct? Okay.
I
So
received review units. What was the rest of that?
a lot at times,
Yeah.
depending
Oh,
on
yeah.
what the
From
company
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Generally, because I'll give an example. I got this HP product, right? I got this HP laptop here that I'm still using.
Mhm.
And my way of reviewing a product is I'm not in the business of making my money from reviewing tech and then having it posted immediately. I
Right.
like long-term usage cases where I
Yeah.
could honestly use this in a real-world environment and then say, listen, I think it's a great laptop, or I think it's a terrible laptop or a phone, whatever. Those don't
Mhm.
make anybody money. You're not going to make money from long-term case usage. So when you
Yeah.
get a product,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of people would be interested in this, you
Mhm.
you don't necessarily do the review first. You do a first take.
Yeah, and I do that to sort of satisfy the need, right? So I know there's a desire to see something about it immediately, and so I can give a first impression type thing, but I don't usually do the review until some number of weeks later, months in some cases.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm sitting on a couple of HP devices right now that I haven't reviewed yet, that I've had for months, and I've used a bunch. I've traveled with them, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's kind of tedious, but
So then there's the other side where let's say you receive a product before it comes out and you're told to use it for X amount of weeks or X amount of
mhm,
days and then leave your and you the I guess the fact that you got this early, you release it the day of. How long
mhm.
generally do you have with the product when you're releasing a review like that on average?
You know, I think the reason you're asking me this question is, there was a story that came out today that said that the Samsung reviewers were asked to send their devices back,
Yeah.
and, as if this was some kind of an unprecedented type thing. And, one of the reviewers I saw on Twitter had kinda come out and said, "This is not a news story, that we had these things for," I think it was a 2-week time period, and the 2 weeks is up as of Thursday, and we had to send them back anyway. I will tell you that the vast majority of gadget reviewers never ever send those devices back, and that getting the device for free is a big
Part of
part
it.
of their
Yeah.
compensation, whether
Well,
they admit
it's
it or not.
also it's also a big part of no matter how much of an honest reviewer a lot of people may
Yeah,
think they are, if a company is constantly giving you new products and
sure.
they're very friendly with you, it kind of skews your opinion of them. I'm not saying this is me or you or
Well,
anybody
okay,
any
so
individual, but it
I
happens.
look, I think it does. I mean, I look, I've been reviewing hardware for over 20 years. I don't getting something free from a company is not going to skew my opinion of the product or whatever. But for a younger guy, especially, that kind of a random tech blog, you could see where that would be a big deal, especially if they're not getting paid a lot to begin with. I haven't read about. I probably won't write about this. I took a great exception to this notion that Samsung is, has always been getting their devices back within 2 weeks. I guarantee you that if you look at
Mm.
anyone was being honest about it, if Samsung sent out 1,500 devices to review back when the S10 came out, they got back 5 of them.
Wait a minute.
You know,
Hold on. You said that okay. So Samsung has in the past their claim is that within 2 weeks they received their phones back?
Samsung didn't say that. That's what one tech reviewer said,
Okay.
was that the 2-week period is coming, and we were gonna send them back anyway. That's
Yeah.
nonsense.
Okay, I'll
Um,
I'll give you an example. I was
yeah.
reviewing phones for AT&T for a while. They would
Mhm,
send me phones, and I believe I was very negative on a Samsung phone. I had never
sure.
been asked to send the phones back in the past until I was very negative on a phone,
And then
and then they
suddenly
asked me, for a itinerary of products back, which
yep.
I wasn't even using. They're sitting in a box, but I'm like, "Okay, a, uh do you have a label for me to send it back with? Because it came with courier."
Yeah, yeah.
And
It
they
ver
sent the
so
courier.
that's interesting. So, 2 things to this. My policy is very simple. I mean, obviously, if a company wants their product back, it's theirs. They can have it back. They usually, will send a return label in the box, which you can use to send it back. I would say almost always. If there is a specified time frame, that's actually very rare. Where, well, maybe that's not fair. I would say, uh, a s it's more common for there not to be a specified time frame. I actually do see time frames sometimes from companies. However, with the exception of only one company I can think of off the top of my head, if I need more time, and I always need more time, if I go back to them and say, "Hey, look, I'd like to hold on to this for longer if I could," the answer is always yes. And because they want you to do the right thing for the product, whatever it is. I don't believe I've ever been the subject of recriminations like you just described.
Yeah.
I've certainly, I mean, when products are truly terrible, I pretty much just decide not to review them, you know. And I don't do that to skew it to good reviews. I want to tell people about things that I can honestly recommend and so forth. But yeah, uh, I don't know. Some companies are a little more aggressive about getting their stuff back than others. I mean, I don't want to. It's not.
No,
There's
listen,
no
that's
point
the
in
case,
naming names,
and
but
I also think for the Samsung case, I'm
yeah.
willing to bet that they were going to ask for it back anyway because I'm assuming this is not going to be compared to let's say a Galaxy S10. This is going to be a much smaller supply that's
Well,
manufactured, so
yeah,
they
but
need more units out there for first tier, second tier, third tier reviewers to get. Because I've
oh,
gotten other people's review units in the past.
okay. That okay.
That's the only
I
thing
guess
I can
that's
think
how.
of.
that doesn't happen very much. It hasn't happened to me in a long time. I years and years ago, I had reviewed an Apple iMac, and it was like the one that looked like a flower with a half dome base
Yeah.
and matriculating arm or whatever. And I needed a Mac for a project I was working on. It was like an education book, and I said, "Look, is it? I've already set this thing up. It's configured and everything. Can I just buy it from you?" And they said, "We can't. The way the review process works is that device was going somewhere else, and they actually told me where it was going, and it was going to NBC, where it would be used as a prop on TV shows."
Oh my
I
god.
was like, "Okay." So anyway, I ended up buying one, and I used it for the book project, and then eventually I sold it to a friend's wife or whatever. But I don't know. There are. I don't know. It's just, I think the only thing about that, to be fair, I should say too. I'm sorry. There's a lot of things going through my head right now with this topic. To be fair to reviewers, who some of whom are of higher quality and maybe stronger moral background or whatever, there are some good arguments to be made for holding on to many devices for long-term time periods as well. I know some people just kind of collect device; they're just sitting in boxes or in their homes, and I don't know why you would want to build out like a Ford out of 27 laptops or whatever, but those people are out there. But to use the Samsung Galaxy Fold as a good example, in the coming months, that thing is going to be updated with new software updates that will improve the functionality. And I think that for many reviewers, it would actually be very useful to see how that thing has improved over time, because they may not be able to recommend it necessarily right now, but 2 months down the road or 3 months, they can say, "Hey, actually, Samsung fixed all the problems. If you're thinking about this, maybe now is not a bad time." Or Huawei or some of the other companies that have announced folding phones will come out with their folding phones, and now you want to compare it to those. And so something to look forward to, folks, is when those things happen, you'll see those reviewers will have the old device that they reviewed 6 months ago sitting next to it in a photo saying, "Look, here are the two things next to each other." That's how you know they never sent it back.
Yeah.
They didn't buy that from themselves 9 times out of 10. They were using the review unit is on perpetual loan or whatever. For me, that kind of thing, and that does happen. It's one of the problems with reviewing. And like, I know to a normal person, this sounds like it would be an awesome problem, but these things come to your home, they take up space, they start piling up. What do you do with them? I can't give them away. I cannot sell them for sure.
Yeah.
I can't donate them really. I mean, it creates a bit of an ethical and even a kind of physical issue, um, if you don't keep on top of it, which I don't, because I don't really, so sometimes you have to kind of go back. I've had this issue, like this happened to me with one PC maker. I ended up sending back, 7 or 8 boxes all at once. And it was for reviews I had written over a period of probably 2 years. But eventually you can go back, like I said, they supply the return label, so you can kind of get them back when you want to, I guess.
Yeah. So it's delayed, and I mean, isn't that kind of the kiss of death when you have a product that has
Yes.
gotten unanimously
So
such a terrible review, and now you
I, s-
have to delay the product when you
yeah,
bring it to market again?
yeah.
What's the
I
perception?
cannot remember. You asked, I can't remember a time that this has ever happened. So I so infrequently get to say that I was right about something. You may recall last week I was saying, "There's no way this thing is shipping. There's no way." And you saw the first hint of it. I think it was over the weekend. Samsung delayed their Asia-based launch events for the Galaxy Fold, and then as of yesterday or today, whenever it was, they're actually delaying the launch of the product itself. Um, yeah, it's not going to go well. This is so this can go one of two ways, right? One way is that they actually do send units out to people who paid for them at some point, and that could be 2 weeks from now, it could be 2 months from now, it could be 6 months from now. Who knows? Um, the other way it could go is they say, "You know what? This thing is not living up to the quality that Samsung's customers expect. We're going to put this thing on the back burner, and maybe sometime next year we'll come out with a new design which they can announce later this
Best
year."
case for Huawei, huh?
Yeah. Well, we talked about this too. I mean, Samsung's in a tough spot now today because of Huawei and because of other Chinese phone makers. Um, They don't have the innovation edge that they used to have, especially in displays. They certainly don't have the cost edge. And when they announced this phone, I mean, in many ways, of the two or three that were announced at around the Mobile World Congress timeframe, the Samsung one was the least sophisticated looking, quite frankly. And so we'll see. I'm kind of amused. I see things on Twitter where people are acting like they're not surprised that this is what happened. This is very surprising.
It's a
I think
first,
people
yeah.
look at this curved display and I think, well, yeah, of course it's not going to work. And it's like, well, no, of course it is going to work, but it's a matter of timing on when it's going to work. I think Samsung rushed this thing to market. Like I said
Yeah.
last week, I think they were betting very much on their status as an innovator and being first, and that all the bad things that happened to them with the Note 7, as terrible as that was, you would think that that experience would influence them not to do what they just did, but they shipped it anyway, or they started to ship it, to reviewers. It's too bad.
So
It's too
do
bad. This should never have happened.
yeah, I think that's the rarity here, but also, um, when you rush innovation to that level,
Yeah.
uh, you're kind of putting, this is the risk that you take. Now, I'm thinking maybe Huawei will face a very similar issue. This may be an issue all across the board with
Oh,
real aggressive testing. We haven't gotten that from Huawei yet, right? Have we gotten the
well, if we did, we didn't notice because Huawei until just a few years ago was pretty much China only or Asia only, and they've had an explosive bit of growth in Europe and elsewhere in the world. And so now I think if they had a problem like this, we would certainly notice it. But I look, I have to go back to the first thing I said about the Galaxy Fold, which was only Samsung would ship a product like this. That somewhere deep inside Apple's Cupertino lab somewhere there is a folding iPhone thing. And it looks probably a lot like the Samsung thing. It's not ready for production. It's not the quality level that Apple would ever ship to real world customers. And that when they saw that, they must have laughed before these problems even occurred. As soon as Samsung announced that, they must have been looking at each other like, what are they doing? And there's this really bulky, awkward looking thing with a tiny screen on the outside, and
yeah.
the folding screen is on the inside, and it's a separate screen from what's on the outside. It's like, what is this thing? It looks like a prototype. And I don't know. It's like every company has like a kind of culture. The culture at Apple, whatever you think of it, they're certainly slower moving than a lot of other companies. That's been beaten to death. But you, generally speaking, obviously there are exceptions. When Apple does ship something, that thing is of pretty high quality, right? Um, they're never going to have this kind of a problem. He says, as their
Yeah.
MacBook, keyboards are terrible too. Um,
But
but this
listen, this is
Samsung
a
thing,
company, but Apple's a company that does not have touchscreen on their
yeah.
laptops. They, d- you know,
Well,
they've had the option, they've had the concept of bringing over iOS apps to the Mac platform, which makes a lot of sense. But they haven't done that until in
yeah,
a
but
couple of months from now they'll do it.
not to get off on an Apple tangent, but to defend Apple, uh, defend is maybe the wrong word. To explain Apple, I will say that they probably have a strategic imperative that has prevented them so far from putting touch on a Mac, right? That the amount of engineering that would require, because they have to adapt not just the hardware but all of their software to suddenly work with touch. Despite the kind of end user or especially developer advantages to having that in the system. I mean, how nice would it be on a MacBook Pro to be able to touch the screen in an iOS emulator and have it respond like it would on a phone? Like it's an obvious need. Like it's a really nice thing to have. But for Apple, what trumps that is they have this booming business for iPhone especially, but let's just say for iOS, that dwarfs the Mac. And they don't want to screw with that. They don't want to they don't want to be the one that puts the wedge in where someone says, "Well, now I don't need one of these iOS devices because my Mac does that too."
Mm.
And so that's the way they've done things. Not because it's the right thing to do for customers, but because it's the right thing for them to do for their business. But I think they actually will get to touch on Macs, and I think the kind of tortured path that you go there via is last year they said, well, we're going to put these three iOS apps on the Mac, and this year they're going to say, well, we're going to put a bunch more on, and then we're going to let developers put their own iOS apps on the Mac. And then another year is going to go by and they're going to say, it's interesting. What we found is that now that you can have these iOS apps on the Mac, now it makes sense to have touch,
Yeah. People just
right?
want to
No, I mean, you
touch
could
now.
kind of
Yeah.
imagine it. In fact,
Yeah.
Apple being Apple, you could almost imagining them first enabling touch only in iOS apps, right? To give them time to tailor the rest of the OS to make sense for touch. You
Oh
can almost
boy.
picture it. I'm not saying this
Yeah.
is what's going to happen.
No,
How
I
would I
can.
know?
Yeah.
But that's the way the company does things. So yeah, it's just a different culture.
It is. It's a very different culture. Paul, I want to continue this discussion, obviously, but before we continue, I want to talk about our great sponsor, and that's Hover. I'm a big fan of buying domain names. I buy it for almost every one of my shows that I have just to protect assets. But if you have a business or you're starting a website, what better way to get your idea out there with a great domain name? If you go to hover.com/WTT, you get 10% off your first purchase. That's hover.com/WTT. I know a lot of you guys are web designers, web editors, business owners, and I get messages all the time. People asking me, "Ooh, that was weird. You see what happened to my camera?
Yeah.
Ooh, I entered a parallel universe just now. A demon just left my body during this hover read, and you caught it on camera, guys. Uh, I know a lot of you guys have these businesses, and a lot of you guys ask me, like, oh, what do you use? I use Hover for all my domain names, and so should you. Also, you could get an awesome email address with your domain name through Hover. No upselling, no secret charges at the end, like some of those other guys. Hover, it's in and out. It's super easy. Hover.com/WTT. Get 10% off your first purchase. I want to thank Hover for supporting the show. So you kind of went into the Apple category here, which I kind of wouldn't mind touching.
Mhm.
I have so many PC laptops in my life now. I have that crazy Asus gaming one that I bought for production reasons, which Asus, by
Yep.
the way, just released a brand new one today. They had
Yep.
a big announcement after I got it. I may
Yeah.
return this thing at that one.
Well,
I haven't decided
um,
yet.
because Intel announced their
Ninth
new
gen.
H series processors, so every gaming PC maker had an announcement today
Yeah.
around that.
So I may or I may not. I don't know. This may be perfect for what I need. But on the Apple side, I have my HP here, and I have another HP, and I have I'm covered in laptops at this point because I'm reviewing all these. Um, when you talk about an advantage, you kind of need touchscreen on this thing. You're right. And I
Yeah.
do see how they're going to roll out and say, oh, maybe on some apps because the Mac OS platform isn't touchscreen ready, and they'll slowly phase it in like that, and it'll be forgiven because it's Apple, right?
Well, forgiven. I don't
I
know.
can't
I
wait.
mean,
I can't wait. I cannot wait till the headline reads, "This is how Windows should have transitioned into touch." The right way
right.
of
Oh yeah,
transitioning
yeah,
into
yeah,
touch. We're going to see all of
yeah.
those.
I can give you a couple of names of the people who'll be writing
Yeah.
those articles, but
I know.
uh,
There's one right for the
well,
Wall Street Journal.
so the I it's probably fair to point out that the the path that Microsoft went down with touch on Windows was not necessarily the most efficient way to do it either. And as good as the gestures are and all that kind of stuff, I mean, as far as touching apps and all that, that stuff hasn't really taken off in any meaningful way on Windows either. And the PC has kind of settled into a productivity role where keyboard mouse is maybe more common, but the point of touch isn't so much like it's going to replace anything. It's just that it works alongside everything else. It's fine. If all you do is scroll up with your finger on a web page, it's still nice that it's there. It's just another way to do it, you know. And for developers in particular, like I said, I mean, one of the advantages on the Windows side is when you've got these device emulators that are for touch devices like phones, you can touch the screen, and it works like the phone does. I mean, it's just
Well,
a
Windows has been supporting touch since Windows. I mean, since Windows XP.
well, in some capacity. I mean,
In some,
the
yeah.
early like Windows Tablet PC edition had, I think it was like single touch, and then multi touch probably came.
But they
And
were kind of forced into it, right? Because of the hardware, because of the hardware manufacturers out there. Majority of people early on that were using touch-based laptops were in the medical.
so
There
yeah,
were
sure.
doctors or whatever. It
Hmm.
was medical usage, and then it transitioned into everything else. but they were kind of forced into supporting it rather than working within the hardware, working with the hardware manufacturers and saying, okay, well, this is how we're going to dictate touch because it
Well,
was still the Wild
look, I mean,
West.
on the flip side, you could make an argument that a system like Android or iOS should support a mouse, right? Not because the majority of people will ever use it with a mouse, but in cases like when you have an iPad Pro type device where you could have a trackpad on the keyboard and that would be super useful for productivity tasks, that makes that device more usable in those scenarios for those people that do want to do that. Just like having touch on a primarily productivity focused, Windows tablet 2-in-1, whatever. Even if you're not using touch most of the time, it being there doesn't hurt anybody, and it does benefit the people that want to use it. Anyway, I think the Mac will eventually have touch, but Apple, they'll
Yeah.
the way they do things.
To kind of move on from this to get into something else. I guess we are on the laptop category, but I'll save that for the next
Mhm.
thing. I'm going based on notes. Google I/O May 7th. Build also right, a couple days before that.
Yeah, yeah, they're
So
at the same time again.
again, with Google I/O, it's interesting how it transitioned into hardware now, huh? Over the
Uh,
years, you're seeing a little bit more and more hardware. You're going to get a lot of those Nest style devices. You're going to get a new Google
yeah.
Home and things like that.
Well,
It,
Google, remember they still do have a hardware event every year, but a lot of times for Google, because they're the platform maker and they're adapting Android for these different new device types or scenarios, whatever, they have to have some kind of a home device or a smart display or what, like they're not usually like the flagship devices at IO, but usually there is often some hardware component, I guess.
I'm trying to remember. We years and years, I would watch Google I/O and I'd be excited for a Gmail update, or
Yep.
a
Yep.
or the announcement for Google TV. If they're going to announce something new for Google TV. Now it's really
Mhm.
transitioned into their pretty much all their smart devices and software that surrounds it and their AI stuff.
Yep.
Is there anything that you're looking forward to this year?
No, it's funny with Google I/O, I don't really have the same expectations that I do for, say, Microsoft Build, right? There are certain things I'm looking for at that show, and I'll be disappointed, but because Microsoft too is focusing on a lot on cloud AI, not on the things I necessarily care about, which is the client essentially, so Windows or some new light OS or whatever. But no, on the Google front, it's not so much that I'm going into it expecting anything or looking forward to anything in particular, but they usually go through this list of the AI based enhancements that they make across the board to things like Gmail or Calendar, Google Photos or Google Home or whatever it is. And I honestly, for me, most of what they announce is kind of a surprise, so it's actually kinda cool. I would love to be that surprised in a good way by Microsoft at Build, but, that typically hasn't been the case, so, I don't know. That week will be interesting. I think what is that? That's gonna be what, 2 weeks?
7th, yeah,
2 weeks from
yeah,
now? Yeah, 2
week and a half,
weeks.
2 weeks,
Jeez,
yeah.
it's happening quick.
I know, I can't believe it. Because this always means that the summer's here every year when they do this for me, and I think it's nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the big thing is going to be Android Q and the next, which is their next version of
Yes, of
Android,
course. Yep.
Android
Yep.
10. A lot of the rumors are that they're going to have a system-wide dark mode, improved privacy and
Mhm.
permissions, iPhone 10 like navigation gestures, which I would welcome, as well as Face ID like features. These are just some of the stuff, obviously here, but
I think I'm the only person on earth who likes the navigation in Android P. Like if you have a Google Pixel device where it's the pure software-based buttons, there's 2 buttons at the bottom. I really prefer that to like the old Android styles, like the 3 buttons,
I have yeah.
Yeah,
I like the 3 buttons, but the problem with the 3 buttons is that everybody lays them out differently.
right.
It's not like a
Well, by
unified
everybody, we mean Samsung.
by
So,
everyone, I mean Samsung.
um, if you're a Samsung user, I strongly recommend reversing the button order so it looks like every other Android device. That way, when you make your inevitable
That is what I
transition to
do.
Huawei next year, it will just work.
Yeah, I that's actually what I do.
Yeah.
Um, I like these announcements and I like this, but something that I would like to see more, and I think we were supposed to get it and we didn't get it was more editing features within Google Photos.
Yeah.
I remember about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, they were really talking about adding a lot of editing abilities and filtering and things like that from within Google Photos.
Mhm.
And I have a whole theory on this, and this is just my theory. Okay,
Okay.
they were going to go very aggressive with this because they were going to incorporate that into Google Plus in some way, where Google Plus was going to maybe become like an Instagram kind of competitor because
Yeah.
all your photos are within Google anyway. So this would have been a nice transition for them, and they were going to put a lot of emphasis on your ability to make these beautiful filters and
Right.
beautiful photos and have it on that platform. And when the platform died, so did the aggressiveness to kind of push Google Photos as,
Mhm.
this hub. Because if you realize they've kind of slowed down with this, right?
On the Google Photo side?
The emphasis on the Google Photo side because it was very
I
aggressive for a while.
Yeah, I think it has to if you're correct, and that makes some sense to me. There's not much impetus for Google to improve, like, the filters and the editing capabilities of a product where you're gonna use it to then go out to Instagram or to Facebook or whatever, right? So, like, why would they bother? And that kinda makes sense. I mean, I I'm not sure where they have to go with Google Photos at this point. It seems really smart in a way. It will ask me to clean up things like when I have pictures or receipts. It will ask me from time to time if I want to look at rotation of photos that it thinks are not rotated correctly. It does the wizard type things where it says, this day and whatever, or here's a movie, or here's a um, stylized photo that a version of a photo that you took. Like I like it. I don't know. I don't know. I think Google Photos is in a pretty good place, but yeah,
I
as
think
far as
it's
like
matured.
editing, I don't
Yeah.
even I'd have to look at it like what's even
Yeah, I mean, they were
what is even
talking
in there.
about that to be able to kind of do a little bit more editing
Yeah,
than you have now, and it kind of like right now I'm in Google Photos on the desktop. I'm just looking at it, and
yeah,
it's kind of blah. It's
kind of
there.
basic. Yeah,
It's very basic with the Google Assist stuff that they with the reminders of today and whatever. It's a little all over the place, and I
right.
was preferring this over Photos on the Mac. And I have this. I think that Apple
I
does a
mean,
better job with their photos at this point.
they do. It's pretty. They have all the basics in here. I don't know. It's okay.
I think I'm just
And then
disappointed that
because
I
yeah,
thought it
they
was going to
support
be more.
external editors and all that. I mean, they do have filters. It's funny. I don't really ever look at this, but actually, if you want to do Instagram style filters, it's
Yeah,
in
you
there. So
can.
if you'd like to blow it out with HDR or whatever,
Yeah, you can
I
if
don't
you
know.
want.
There's not a lot, but it's got the basics.
Yeah. Um, how did I get to this? I have no idea. Oh, I was talking about Google I/O. There we go. I'm like, how do we get to Google Photos?
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see what happens there. What are you expecting from Build this year?
Well, this is not so much what I'm expecting, but what I'm hoping. I'd like to hear something about Windows 10, which is something they've ignored now for about 2 years. I think Windows 10 is at an interesting place. There have been a bunch of scale backs of bad policies over the past 3, 4 months that add up to something really interesting. Where the Windows 10 version 1903, the version that's coming out in May, is has gotten rid of a lot of the crap, that kind of bogged down Windows 10 before. That's cool, but I'm curious if it's part of a strategy. I'd like to hear like what we're doing going forward. So, if you're familiar with the way Windows is being developed right now, testers are actually testing the version that's coming out like a year from now, even though there's a version coming up before then. So I'm hoping to hear something about what's going on there. But the bigger thing I'm really interested in, and I got to say, I'm almost on the verge of being obsessed by this topic, is this thing with the new Chromium based version of Microsoft Edge, and whether it means, as I think it does, that this new Lite OS, which is a kind of a light version of Windows with a new UI, is in fact going to basically be a Microsoft Chromebook, right? That,
Interesting.
yeah, I mean,
D-
I think Microsoft's been dancing around. We need something like a Chromebook, and now that they're actually using Chrome, for their browser, it's like, well, actually, we could just make a Chromebook, a Chromebook
Well,
platform.
so
So I'm
a
kind of
couple weeks
hoping. I don't know.
ago,
I'm curious if they're going to announce something or along those lines.
when you, Brad, and Mary Jo had that event in New York City,
Mhm.
you brought up Windows as a service, right?
Right. Right.
And I don't know if I brought it up here, but when you guys were talking about Windows as a service, I think this Windows Lite, I know whatever I'm using quotes for people who don't see Windows Lite.
Yeah.
Windows Lite could be their introductory to services where you could pay whatever a month and you get everything bundled in with Windows Lite. And that could be their
Yeah.
nice test where, you get your Windows, you get your Office, you get everything, essentially all your services that you need, including Xbox
Right.
services within Windows Lite, whatever they may do with this.
Well, I think this is like Microsoft 365, I think is what you're.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
let's say Microsoft
yeah, yeah.
365, but maybe they could do
Um,
something to incorporate that within the light, with the
I think, yeah. So, if you kind of accept that for the mainstream world, for most people, we use our phones all the time. We use computers less than we used to. There are things that we used to do on computers that we now just do on phones, like music, right? Or podcasts. Right? These are two things I used to have on my computer and sync to a mobile device. Now it's just all on my phone. That's all, and I think most people are like that. You were talking about photo editing on in Google Photos. A lot of people will do that right on their phone because they're taking the pictures with their phone anyway. Um, will always be people who have special needs, and I have special needs around writing and so forth. A big screen, real keyboard. I'm a writer. A computer kind of thing makes sense. But even for people like me, um, I think a simpler system makes tons of sense, and I think something like Chrome OS makes tons of sense. Something that's like Chrome OS but managed by Microsoft, a company that more people trust than Google, makes even more sense.
Yeah. I think
And
the uphill
I
battle for them would be supporting software because when you think Microsoft, when you think
yeah,
Windows, you think of certain softwares that you're used to running. How do you incorporate that?
yeah. So there's two things to that. So one of the problems that Microsoft's had in the past with their light versions of Windows is that they look like Windows. So I'm talking about things like Windows RT back in the day, or Windows 10 and S mode more recently, um, or Windows 10 on ARM, right? Which is another example of this kind of a problem. When people see something that looks like Windows, they have an expectation that it's Windows and it will run all Windows apps. And then when it doesn't, you have problems. So this light OS thing's not going to look like Windows. It will look different. I think that's going to help. But I also think that for special cases, someone's home and they have a bigger screen attached or whatever it is, they can, or you're an educational institution or you're in a corporation that's managed with a Active Directory, that they'll be able to bring true Windows apps to that limited desktop, either through remote desktop or some kind of container system or whatever it is, and that compatibility issue will be solved,
Listen,
right?
this is
It,
Windows as a service. I'm telling you, I'm not as
well,
anti Windows as a service as some people are. You have this. Let's make this scenario up, right? We have a lower end, Windows Lite PC, and you pay
yeah,
X amount a month, and you could do a remote access and use Windows on the cloud and do all your editing, all your processing, everything on
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
that's how they do Windows as a service. I would honestly, and I'm not exaggerating this. Give an example. John, our editor, is in desperate need of a new computer for editing.
right,
I have no problem paying X amount a month that gives him access to this cloud, and obviously it would have to be
well.
seamless and latency free and all this stuff that Microsoft is capable of doing with Azure to have him be able to do everything in the cloud and just use his computer for the basic needs that he has.
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, look, there's old timers or people who people literally have specific needs. Like this thing they're doing will not be solved by some web-based or mobile app alternative, whatever. But I think for most people, there are simpler solutions to almost everything that they're doing. And one thing I was experimenting with on a Chromebook I was using recently was Android apps, right? And you can do things like you install a game and it runs in this little phone-shaped window in the middle of the screen, and you maximize it and it goes full screen and it works with touch and everything. It works fine. I think that's kind of interesting. And then you can take the mobile app versions of Microsoft apps like mobile Outlook or mobile Word, and you can blow them up full screen again, and it's not as sophisticated as Windows. There's no doubt about it, because it's a mobile app. It's not necessarily designed from day one to work on a Chromebook or whatever, but it does work. And I think even for someone like me, like I said, like a writer, using the web-based version of Word or the mobile app version of Word it's not it's not ideal. It's not as good
Yeah.
as using the Windows desktop version. But does it get the job done? Like, would this be okay for most people? Yeah, it's pretty damn close.
I
And
I think you just laid out the Google Docs point of business. It's not as
well,
good, but it does
well,
the
but I
job.
mean, most people don't care, you know.
No, no,
And
seriously.
I mean, Microsoft had an Android app solution, a few years ago, and then walked away from it. But I have to wonder if this Lite OS thing, if they could run Android apps in this, wouldn't that solve a lot of problems?
Very
In the same
interesting.
way that bringing iOS apps to the Mac is kind of cool. Bringing Android apps to Chromebook is kind of cool. Bringing Android apps, especially Microsoft's Android apps, to this Lite OS thing, to what I'll call an Edge book. That would be pretty cool, right? Especially if this was like a formal strategy for Microsoft, they could tailor their apps so that when those apps that they have already made are known to be running on one of their own devices, would maybe behave in a slightly more sophisticated way. Those could replace traditional desktop apps for a lot of people.
By the way,
So,
I said something. I said latency free. I mean
Mhm.
extremely low latency. I'm
Sure.
saying
No,
very,
Andrew, you
very
said
low
something
latency.
literal, and we're gonna take it
Yes.
literally.
I'm just saying.
Um, so this is we've been talking about this for so long, it's almost kind of hard to remember the question, but just so people remember, you asked me, what am I expecting from Build? And I'm not sure that I'm expecting anything. What I'm hoping to hear is everything I just talked about. I honestly don't expect to, but I really hope to. I want to hear what's happening with Windows Next. I want to hear what's happening with this Windows Lite thing, this Lite OS, and what I think of as an Edge book. I want to know what the plan is for the future because I think there's a big mainstream market for computing that Microsoft can and should be part of. And I don't if all they have is Windows, I think they just kind of get edged out of it over time. I
Eventually.
think they
Yeah.
need something simpler.
By the way, Windows Lite, it's
Mhm.
I think we're looking at it wrong, Paul. It's just a smart light bulb. That's
It's
all it
just
is. That's
yeah, yeah.
all it is. It's
Actually, the
the
part that's not in it is the Windows bit. So we should probably just forget about that aspect of it. Yeah.
I do want to continue this conversation. I also want to talk about Verizon and YouTube TV teaming up, and I do feel that this is going to be the future of television as far as these
No.
streaming provider, as far as the pipes go. These cable
Mhm.
companies, they're going to realize how expensive it is to maintain a network and the infrastructure, and I think this is where it's headed. And this is a
Oh.
good example of that. Before we continue, I want to thank our sponsor. Not that one. There we go. TextExpander. My buttons are broken, Paul. I want to thank TextExpander. Go to textexpander.com/podcast. You get $20 20% off your first year. And I've been using these guys for a while. They TextExpander 6.5 for the Mac and 2.0 for Windows. It sports all new visual editors and snippets. Now, the way that I use this is I constantly, repeatedly have to write the same things. So I have hotkeys. I have certain words, like I do WTT, and it fills out my entire tweet. Or if I do MM, it just fills out my entire Matman tweet or whatever I'm writing. You could insert words, phrases, forms, templates, and more than just a couple of keys everywhere you type, which is amazing. Another thing is if you get a lot of business cards and you're sending a lot of emails out, you could just have hotkeys and then just fill in the entire email. It's actually really awesome how these guys work. And to show our appreciation to our listeners, we're giving 20% off your first year of service. Go to textexpander.com/podcast to learn more about TextExpander. This is a great company. They have it installed on all my hardware, on all my phones, on my on my phones, jeez, on all my laptops. Losing my mind here today. I have it on all my laptops, so it makes life a lot easier. TexasPanda.com/podcast. I want to thank them for supporting the show. Where do we go from here? What did I say? Oh, I want to talk about FiOS.
Mhm.
So it came out that
I did not see this, by the way. So what's
okay.
happening here?
So if you have Verizon FiOS or you have subscribed to their 5G plan, right, or in limited locations at home, you can now bundle YouTube TV with them. They have not
Okay.
released the prices as of the point of me copying and pasting this. They haven't released the prices, but I'm curious if they're going to subsidize this in any way because you're going through FiOS. Now, there was a report that FiOS TV lost, I believe, 53,000 subscribers last quarter.
Yeah,
And oh, here it is. FiOS Internet customers were up 52,000, and FiOS TV customers were down 53,000.
interesting.
Q4 18 versus Q1 19. This
People are
may be
walking
the
away from TV, but they're keeping the
they are
FiOS.
they are. But
That's
here's
what
the
I would
thing with
do.
this. I get it. I get cord cutting. This isn't. I mean, this is kind of cord cutting, but it's not. You, it's $50 a month now for YouTube TV.
Yep,
It's not that
yep.
cheap. Now, the pros here are that YouTube TV has the best quality out of any
Mhm.
of these TV streaming platforms. Doesn't even They don't even come close. They're
I
doing
think they have the best
1080p,
interface too, by the way.
best interface also, and I've tested all of them long term. Paul knows I did. I've had Hulu, I've had Sling, I've had DirecTV Now, I've had essentially all of them. Maybe one I'm missing.
Right.
I had PlayStation
Mhm.
TV, whatever they were
View,
calling it, View.
view, I guess.
View. Um, this is by far the best as far as quality goes because it actually does 1080 streaming
Yeah.
at a very high bit rate. And if you're watching sports,
Mhm.
you don't get that weird. I have a big problem with low frame rate
Yeah,
when it
I
comes
know
to
what you mean.
sports. It looks like you're watching sports on the internet. Let me just for
It's
lack
like
of a better term,
what's the word for that? It's
not
almost like a
ghosting.
jello effect. It's a no, it's like you're watching a 50 hertz show on a 60 hertz screen. There's something
Something is
off
off.
about
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah. YouTube TV doesn't really have that issue, and the fact that FiOS, which is interesting because they were very aggressive as far as being an IP based TV provider, and that's where their future was going to be. They were going to have these IP little boxes, no more set top boxes. It was all going to be. I mean, I know that it's IP driven and the way that it works with qualms and stuff like that, but it's not pure IP. They were going to go to a streaming ability with a set-top box. Now they're looking to bundle YouTube TV. I'm. Do you think this is going to be the game plan for all these companies? Because I definitely think, as far as maintenance goes and support, to kind of offset that when your subscriber numbers start plummeting,
Yep.
this is
Um,
really the future.
yeah, the future for like cable TV providers and things that are basically cable TV
Yeah,
providers, right? So FiOS is obviously not cable, but it's the same thing. You get cable set top box basically, for every TV, blah blah blah, whatever. So I think what people are finding is that yeah, despite all the complaints about YouTube TV being more expensive than it used to be or whatever, they've all been going up in price. But right now, YouTube TV happens to be the most expensive, but you can expect everyone else to kind of catch up to that. All of the advantages of the service remain, the ability to go in and out of it. If you want to quit, it's very easy to switch and so forth. Um, yeah, I think the future for cable providers is there's not going to be any more landlines, right? They don't really have them today anyway. They're fake, they're like
yeah.
VoIP lines now.
They're not copper lines.
Um,
Yeah,
there's a lot. I mean, look, I yeah, I mean, offloading this stuff. Honestly, it's kind of funny that someone like Fios is doing this because I feel like offloading this to a third party is something that would benefit like the smaller companies. Like my friend John, when I stay in the Boston area, he lives in a town called Norwood. Norwood is kind of unique in that area because for some reason they have like town cable. So they don't have competition from Comcast or Fios or RCN. You just get Norwood. I think it's just called Norwood Cable. Well, a company like Norwood Cable, aside from the illegal monopoly that they have, um, would benefit from this kind of thing because right now there's like an infrastructure to, paying for the packages they have to have and all this kind of stuff. Like, just offload that to YouTube. It's perfect. I mean, I think that makes tons of sense. And I think increasingly that it's really interesting that those two numbers you gave were almost identical. I think you said total owner or subscribers were up 52, but TV viewers were down 53.
yeah.
Those are the
The
same people,
wash.
right?
Yeah,
People are joining and they only want the pipe, you know, and they'll handle the other stuff themselves. So if you as FiOS can offer the TV part of it for less than those people would pay on their own, you're going to get a piece of that, right? You're benefiting from that. And so, yeah, I
tremendously.
think
Yeah.
it makes tons of sense. You have to assume it's going to be a discount of some kind over paying for it yourself.
It would have to be, but the other thing about YouTube TV, and a lot of people need to don't know this, is that it allows you to share it with up to 5
I
people.
know.
So if you really want
Yeah,
to think
multiple
about it,
screens without hardware, special
yeah.
hardware. Those screens include mobile devices of all kinds, PCs, whatever, anything with a browser.
And they're very straightforward about you being able to watch this on multiple TVs and multiple
Yep.
households and things like that. They're kind of pro sharing, which you
You can
don't
even
really
do something
see.
like if you're here, like say I'm going on a business trip next week, right? So if for some, I'm not a Phillies fan, but let's say I was a baseball fan and I watched the Phillies because I live near Philadelphia. I could be traveling on the road in Seattle and on my laptop, and I could watch the Phillies game live on TV because I have web access to YouTube TV.
Yeah,
Like just like I was home.
yeah,
That's the dream. That's what people want.
yeah. I
It's
think
not to watch
it's
the Phillies. The Phillies are terrible. Don't
nobody
ever
wants
watch
to
the Phillies.
listen,
But
but they
you know
got
what I'm
Harper.
just using it as an example.
They got one good guy to a
I'm just kidding. No,
multi-million
I know.
million dollar deal.
Yeah, yeah.
I listen. I'm very hopeful that this kind of continues. This trend continues. Also, they announced last week. I don't know if we covered it, but Amazon and Google have made up. I think we discussed it at the end
Yeah.
of the show,
Did we
and
yeah, we probably
I
did.
think that's a tremendous positive. Where YouTube TV and the YouTube app are going to come to Fire TVs again,
Yep.
especially YouTube TV. It's crazy that app is not on there.
I know.
I've been Chromecasting, and I figured out a way to log in through kind of tricking it into thinking it's an Android device and it's a Fire TV, and I was able to do it
Yeah.
that way for a little bit,
Chromecasting
but
is actually not horrible in this one scenario because you can look at the guide on your TV while you're watching content, and it actually makes it a little easier to switch back and forth because you're using 2 different
it's the
screens.
first time, Paul, that
It's
I've used I've done I'm not I don't hate Chromecast. I think it definitely has a place for certain
yeah.
people and for certain things. I just prefer to have a physical remote and have
Yeah, of
have it
course.
have everything on the TV.
Yep.
But in this case, for YouTube TV, the
I
integration is
know.
done so well on the actual
Yeah.
phone where I
It
don't
actually
mind it at
starts to make
all.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it is amazing how it uses no resources on your phone.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
I think that is wild when you Chromecast how little effect it has on your battery life compared to some other applications that kind of do the
Right.
same exact thing. I think that's a major plus in their category in their list right there.
Hmm.
Um, I do want to touch on one more thing. You wrote a Thurrott Premium article about how on Windows 10. Let me just pull this article up here while I talk to you about this because it would have been nice if I put it in my notes. Where is it? Ah, suddenly Windows 10 doesn't suck. Greatest title ever. But we're
Yeah.
not giving away too much. You want to talk about that a little bit? What you mean by this?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you go back 4 years when Microsoft was launching Windows 10, the big plus for it was they were bringing back the PC centricity stuff, right? With Windows 8, they had gone too far in that direction, touch first, mobile apps that were all pretty much terrible, the mobile app store and so forth. And with Windows 10, they were like, look, we get it. Most people, all people basically are using this thing on a computer, traditional computer as a keyboard and a mouse, big screen. We're gonna tailor it for that. And I welcome that because obviously Windows 8 was kind of a cluster. So that was kind of neat. But there were also problems with Windows 10, right? So there was the Windows as a service stuff where they're updating, 2 major version upgrades every year, monthly, actually bi-weekly, weekly updates require you to reboot your computer. No way to defer those updates if you're a Windows 10 home user. There were privacy concerns with forced telemetry. I don't share those concerns, but they were out there. I do agree that they should have allowed you to turn off the telemetry, meaning you're sending
Yeah.
anonymous information about your computer and the way you use it back to Microsoft, so they can improve the product. It had inbox advertising, not just in applications, but in the OS itself. It would actually pop up ads for things, which is kind of crazy. It came with crapware, which is like, like what? It came with a web browser that was only available on Windows 10, meaning it was tied to Windows 10, meaning it was only updated twice a year, where other web browsers are getting updated every 6 weeks. So this
Yeah.
thing was woefully behind all the time. It only has 3.5% market share. Yeah, it had it had a digital assistant, Cortana, that nobody ever wanted or would ever use on a computer, integrated into the system and into setup in a very annoying way. And it's probably some other things. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. There were a bunch of these things. Like they were just like Windows 10 was great, has always been great, but there's been like this asterisk next to it because there's this other stuff where it's like some of this stuff is not so great. it's really interesting in this latest version of Windows 10, the one that's just about to come out. They have pretty much reversed or fixed everything that I just mentioned. And not completely in some cases, like the defer update thing is you can only do 7 days at a time, but you can defer updates up to 35 days. That's what I was asking for. Um, the inbox advertising is still there. They've scaled that back a little bit. I need to check on the crapware things, but I've seen multiple reports from people who clean install this version and the Candy Crush and all that stuff. It's gone. It's not in there anymore. We know they're fixing some of the other things that I mentioned. And it's nice because now you don't have to have the asterisks, right? You can just be like, Windows 10 is actually pretty freaking great. It's what it should have been 4 years ago for sure, but they're finally doing it, and it's kind of a neat thing because I feel like Microsoft has kind of disrespected Windows, frankly, over the past few years.
What would you say is the biggest problem for consumers with on that side,
It's
on
the
the Windows
updating.
side? It's the updating.
Yeah,
That's
it's the
what
updating.
people are generally upset about. It's just too much.
Well, I know for a lot of normal people, I always use my wife as an example of this. She's got all these windows and tabs and things open, and she's working. She's using it for work, and this little thing will pop up in the corner and say, "Hey, you have this important series of updates you need to install. Click here to do this." And she would drag that thing down to the corner so she couldn't see it anymore than the very top of it. And in Windows 10, that thing, the equivalent of that happens far more frequently. So knowing that people do that, they just reboot the system for you. you know, so you might wake up in the morning and all those windows and tabs you have are gone. You've lost work, maybe you've lost data if you're in the middle of an application that wasn't smart about auto saving. And as a result, there are, I don't know, almost 600 million people who are still running Windows 7, where you don't have to worry about this kind of thing. And that system is going out of support as of January 2020. So there's only about 8, 9 months left. And those people don't want Windows 10. So how do you fix that? Well, you make it so that they can defer updates, and it's not 100% exactly what they want, but it's a step in the right direction. And so I think they're adjusting for these people who just have normal needs. They just don't want to be interrupted so much and or lose data. And so I
Yeah.
think they're trying to fix that. So it's a good thing.
I think so. I think the progress
Yeah.
has been tremendous. Even over the last couple months, couple
Especially over the
years.
past couple of months.
Yeah,
I
well, a
mean, I would
couple of months,
say,
yeah. But even like overall, if you look at it from 2 years ago,
yeah.
very much so. Even though it's a different name, it's the same name as far as the operating
Mhm.
system. They've improved it tremendously. But by the way,
Right.
I think they are going to have to make a decision what they're doing with the OS name.
Yeah. They never should have went with Windows 10. They should have just called it Windows, you know.
Well, if you're not going to
Um,
grow the number, right? If you're not going to progress in the number, then yeah, it should just be called Windows. But if you're
I
going to
think
call
so.
it Windows 10, it doesn't make. I guess it's like OS 10 also. They've done the same idiotic thing, but there's a name that kind of
Well, they did change it to Mac
identifies.
OS,
Now it's Mac
right?
OS. Yes.
And so they do have a name, obviously Apple still updates once a year and there's a name and it's a kind of a fun marketing name, but there's also a version number. And that version number for a long time was 10 point something, right? And are they on 11 now? I think they're on 11 or
Let's see. I'll
I
tell
don't
you right
remember.
now about this Mac. It is version number 10.
Mhm.
No, it's still 10.
Still
10.14.4. Yeah.
So they're on the 14th version of Mac OS 10
Yeah.
essentially. Yeah, so Microsoft has probably shipped what 7 version of Windows 10 so far. So
10.7.
they don't use that kind of
Yeah.
a name, but
They're gonna have to. I mean, obviously, it's gonna be a marketing thing. 5 years from now, you're still running Windows 10. I
well,
think it's
yeah,
gonna be
it
one of
is. Yeah,
those.
it's a problem for sure. Sure.
Perception is king.
Yep.
Perception's everything.
Not
Paul,
just
can you hang?
perception, it's support.
Support. Yeah. Can you hang out for a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Guys, go to our website gfqnetwork.com. If you enjoy the show, we're going to be recording our bonus show right after this. If you're watching live, guess what? You get access to our bonus show. If you're not watching live, you go to patreon.com/whatthetech and fund us there. As little as $1 per episode, you can fund us and get access to the bonus stuff that we do. I'm gonna figure out what we're going to talk about today. I have a couple of things in my mind today. It's going to give it away. Adam in our chat says Windows 10 10.95, Windows 10.98, Windows 10.98 SE. We should just call it all Windows 10. All the versions of Windows from now on should be Windows 10. For all things Paul, go to Thurrott.com. Go check out his content over there, Thurrott Premium. You can sign up, get access to all these awesome articles. Also, Paul and Brad do a great show, First Ring Daily, every single day. They post it up on Thurrott.com. You can go check it out there. You can follow me on Twitter, at Andrew Zarin, of course, at Thurrott on Twitter for Paul. And we'll see you all next time. Take care.